The auditorium tensed as the student sneered. "You forgot me." Morgan didn't blink. The stage lights painted him in gold, a legend framed by years of reverence. But the words, they hit like thunder, unscripted, raw, and loud enough to hush the velvet crowd. At the back of the hall, a young man gripped the mic, eyes burning, voice steady with betrayal. "I sat in your class. I waited for your words. You walked past like I was air." Morgan's hands remained folded, but something behind his eyes shifted, a shadow crossing calm water. Murmurs trembled through the audience like ripples after a stone strike. What was this? A protest? A mistake? Or a reckoning wrapped in rage? The student stepped closer to the stage, jaw tight, each syllable sharper than the last. "You became my god, and then you became a ghost. I needed you." His voice cracked just enough for pain to leak through the rage. Morgan didn't move. His stillness became a weapon, a mirror the student couldn't shatter. Spotlights buzzed above, flickering slightly as if even electricity held its breath. The tribute host, frozen at the podium, glanced toward Morgan with wide eyes. "Should we?" she mouthed, barely audible beneath the student's steady fire. But Morgan raised one hand, palm open, not to stop, but to let it burn. "Let him speak." His voice rumbled finally, deep and composed, as if carved from oak. And just like that, the room belonged to the fire starter and the one he blamed. The student's lip curled, not in triumph, but disbelief. He wasn't expecting permission. He was expecting retreat. "You taught us empathy, Freeman, but you didn't practice it with me." His fingers clenched around the mic, knuckles pale against the metal. "I failed because no one saw me, especially the one who was supposed to." The words dripped with venom, but the sorrow behind them stung harder. Morgan stood slow and smooth, a mountain rising. His expression was unreadable, but his presence shifted the air. He stepped toward the edge of the stage, towering yet gentle, and looked the student dead in the eye. "I remember more than you think," he said quietly, almost too softly for the back rows. The student flinched, confusion and heat crashing behind his eyes, but Morgan said no more. "Not yet." The student shook his head, eyes glinting. "Oh, now you remember?" he spat. "Now that it's a show?" Morgan's gaze didn't waver. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. Only silence answered, and that silence screamed louder than any mic. The student opened his mouth to retort, but no words came. Morgan's stillness had spoken, and the next move belonged to him. A beat passed, then two. The silence stretched until the student filled it with fury. "You had power, influence, a voice that could have saved someone like me." His voice trembled, less from fear, more from the tremor of long-buried wounds cracking open. "I was drowning, and you just walked past, like I didn't exist." The words weren't just for Morgan now. They were for everyone listening. Every student who had felt invisible. Every dreamer left behind. Morgan's eyes didn't narrow. They softened. He stepped off the stage, slow, deliberate, as murmurs brushed the edges of the hall. "I see you now," he said, voice as smooth as aged oak. "I always did." The student laughed bitterly, stepping back. "Don't patronize me. You remember my name?" A pause. "Julian," Morgan replied, quiet, clear. The name landed like a bell toll. Julian staggered, just a fraction. The heat in his eyes didn't dim, but it flickered. "You knew," he said, voice now hoarse, "and you still left me behind?" He looked around the crowd as if searching for judgment, validation, anything but Morgan's gaze. "I was hungry, lost. You praised the ones with perfect grades. I was noise." Morgan said nothing, not yet. The weight of Julian's story had to echo. A cough cracked the stillness. Someone in the back shifted. A program fell to the floor. The room wasn't just watching now. It was leaning in, breathless. "You made me believe I mattered," Julian continued, "and then you vanished like smoke." His hands were shaking. He tried to hide it, gripping the mic harder. Morgan stepped closer, just enough that Julian had to look up. I never vanished. I was just quiet, and you were hurting too loud to hear me. Julian's mouth parted, but no sound came. His eyes searched Morgan's. Confusion mixed with rage, tangled in disbelief. You think that explains it? Morgan's voice grew firmer, lined with the ache of age. No, but I won't explain myself to a man who thinks pain is one-sided. Julian blinked, stunned. He hadn't expected resistance wrapped in empathy. The crowd murmured again, faint, like wind through brittle leaves. Morgan took the mic, slow and steady. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. I failed many. I'm no saint. But forgetting you? No, Julian. He looked out at the crowd, then back at the wounded flame before him. You were unforgettable, even when you tried to disappear. Julian stood frozen, fists clenched, but inside. His fury was faltering. His breath caught, barely, but Morgan saw it. That truth had landed sharp and clean like glass underfoot. You never said anything, Julian muttered, voice quieter now. No words, no message, nothing. Morgan's eyes held his, unwavering. Not all pain makes noise, Julian. The mic trembled in Julian's grip. You saw me struggling and chose silence? No, Morgan said gently. I chose to wait, but maybe I waited too long. The room felt thinner, like the air itself was listening. Julian looked away, jaw twitching. You think that makes it better? Morgan took one slow step forward. No, but I want you to know. I saw you. Julian's body tensed, then loosened just a breath. I was angry, he admitted, because I thought I didn't matter to you. Morgan's voice dropped lower, intimate. You mattered more than you ever knew. A flicker passed through Julian's eyes. Recognition, grief, maybe shame. You once told me the world listens to those who whisper truth, he said. Morgan nodded, the memory echoing between them like a ghost. But I shouted lies, didn't I? Julian asked, bitterness softening into something sadder. You shouted pain, Morgan replied, because you were never taught what silence could hold. A pause. Julian's shoulders sank, truth beginning to crack the shell. The crowd remained hushed, caught in the quiet collision of two broken timelines. Morgan looked out, then back. We don't always know what someone needs in the moment. I needed you, Julian said softly. And I needed time, Morgan answered. But I should have spoken. I see that now. Julian's gaze dropped to the stage floor. He wasn't battling Morgan anymore. He was battling himself. A long silence stretched, charged, but no longer hostile. Morgan reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a folded note. I wrote this the day you left, he said, extending it forward. Julian's eyes widened, hesitation flashing across his face. He stepped forward slowly, almost reverently, and took it. Fingers brushing paper like it was a wound that might still heal. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Why didn't you send it? Morgan's reply was quiet thunder. I didn't know if I had the right. Julian looked down, lips pressed tight, as if words were failing him now. He folded the note carefully, like something sacred, then looked up, eyes glistening. Maybe we were both wrong. Morgan nodded. But we're both here now. Julian stood in stillness, the note heavy in his hand, heavier in his chest. All the years of bitterness, the cold armor of resentment, it was cracking. I built my anger around a silence I never questioned, he said, voice low. Morgan nodded. And I let the silence grow, thinking time would soften it. Julian stepped back, dazed. But it didn't. It turned into something else. Morgan's voice cut through the air. It turned into a weapon, against both of us. The crowd was frozen, not passive but present. Even the spotlight seemed gentler now, less accusing, more revealing. Julian's chest rose and fell, rapid like he was outrunning his own shame. I told myself a story, one where you abandoned me. It made me feel strong. Morgan's gaze was unflinching, words like carved stone. Strength isn't built from blame. It's born when we face our part in the fracture. Julian looked up, rage replaced by the rawness of truth. What if I don't know who I am without the anger? Morgan stepped forward, their distance now barely a breath. Then you get to find out. Right here, right now. The room swelled with silence, thick, sacred, alive. Even the walls seemed to listen, trembling with what had just been said. Julian's face crumpled slightly, lips trembling. His fire hadn't gone out, it had transformed. This whole time, I just wanted to be seen, just once. Morgan placed a hand over his heart. Being seen isn't just about looking back, it's about being brave enough to stand now. Julian's eyes filled, and he didn't look away. Morgan turned slowly to face the audience, shoulders steady. There are many Julians out there, he said. Ones we missed, ones who needed us. Every face in the crowd leaned in, silent, breathless, changed. We can't fix the past, he continued, but we can speak now and never be silent again. A murmur swept through the auditorium, soft, human, alive. Julian stood beside him, not as a rival, but as a man finding his shape again. Morgan passed the mic back to Julian. Julian held it differently now, not like a weapon, but like a bridge. He looked out, eyes flickering with tears and truth. I was wrong, he said, but I'm not lost. And for the first time all night, the auditorium breathed, a single sound of quiet grace. Morgan placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. The past had cracked, but light was pouring through. The lights above softened, as if the room itself was exhaling after holding its breath. Morgan took the mic one last time, his voice quiet, but piercing through the silence like wind through trees. Legacy isn't applause, he said, gaze sweeping across the faces before him. It's what we leave in the hearts of those we forget to notice. He looked back at Julian, no longer a threat, but a mirror of every unspoken pain. And sometimes, he added, we need to be broken open to see what's still alive inside. The crowd didn't clap, they listened, deeper now, drawn into the gravity of the moment. Every teacher, mentor, leader, we miss people. Not out of malice, but blindness, Morgan continued. But silence is not safety, silence is what pain grows in. His voice deepened, steel beneath velvet. So speak, to the ones who fell behind, to the ones who hurt alone. Julian stood beside him now, straight-backed, changed. The boy who entered with fire was leaving with light. Morgan turned to him, placing both hands on his shoulders. You were never invisible. I was just too wrapped in the storm to see clearly. Julian's lips parted, but no words came. Only a nod heavy with meaning. And that was enough. I forgive you, Julian whispered, barely audible. Morgan smiled, soft and certain. And I never stopped hoping you'd come back. A hush passed over the room. No noise, but emotion thick as smoke. Then from the back someone stood. Then another, and another. Not applause, just presence, just recognition. A quiet uprising of empathy. Julian looked out and saw what he'd never seen before. Understanding. And Morgan? He saw something deeper. Redemption. Not for him alone, but for all who choose to show up late, but still show up. This moment was no performance. It was an awakening. As Morgan walked off stage, he paused and looked back once. The past doesn't have to trap us, he said. It can teach us, if we're willing to listen. The final words hung in the air like a warm breeze. Julian followed, walking a step behind, but no longer in the shadows. What began as a takedown ended as a testimony. Two men once broken by silence, now rebuilt by truth. Outside the theater, the world kept moving, but inside every person who heard those words, something had shifted. Empathy had found its way in, and Morgan Freeman? He had given the world what it always needed. Not perfection, not performance, but presence. The room moved on, but the moment, it stayed. If this story made you feel something, share that feeling. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been forgotten or forgiven? Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain. They remember you.